I'm Ernest Dempsey, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Ernest Dempsey.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories. I really appreciate you listening. If you go to hankgarner.com, you can go through all of the archives, more than 300 shows, author interviews with the very best people in publishing today. On the right-hand sidebar, there's places where you can subscribe for just about every platform that you could possibly listen to the show on. Thank you to all of our sponsors for making the show possible. If you would like to sponsor the show, please go to hankgarner.com, and there's a link in the top menu bar where you can do that. At the end of the show, if you'll stick around, we're going to have an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Essence, Book 1, Septima, the first volume in the exciting new science fiction series by Nick Breaker. Troy is no longer himself. Kidnapped by aliens infected with the essence of the dead General Tomas, Troy grasps at his only hope of survival. He merges his soul with the alien parasite trying to possess him, leaving him forever changed, and not entirely for the worse. Once plagued by crippling phobias, Troy is now fearless, willing to fight his enemies with his bare hands. But with his new strength also comes a new weakness: women. Tomas was notorious for his insatiable desires, and Troy finds himself constantly resisting temptation, especially the gorgeous, manipulative Alta. Although Alta has convinced the Pyrrhans she's helping them prepare to battle the murderous Reptarans, she's actually meticulously planning to steal their ultimate power source and then abandon them to their fate. Alta won't hesitate to kill anyone in her way, and her deep love for Tomas is Troy's only advantage. He convinces Alta that Tomas has taken full control of his being and thus keeps her trust and his life. While Alta schemes, Troy covertly struggles to save the Pyrrhans and prevent the Reptarans from invading Earth. But first he must wrest back control of his own soul. Essence, Book 1, Septima, the first volume in the exciting new science fiction series by Nick Breaker. Find it on Amazon today. There's a link in the show notes. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Ernest Dempsey with me on the show. I recently discovered Ernest through a mutual friend of ours, Kevin Tumlinson, whom we were just laughing hysterically at and about right before we started recording, and that's an inside joke for Ernest and I. But Ernest writes these amazing thrillers. Anybody that listens to this show knows that I love a great thriller, especially if you throw in some weird history or some conspiracies. That's just right, in my wheelhouse. So I'm loving Ernest's books, and I'm really excited to get to know you, Ernest. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's very cool. And I didn't actually realize that Kevin was the one that connected us. So now it's even funnier.
It is. I heard the episode that you did with Kevin and loved it so much. I reached out to, first I started reading your books, and then to make sure that you were actually as fun as you sounded on his podcast. And then I reached out to you. So yeah.
Cool.
But we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh, wow. So this isn't necessarily a storytelling moment or dream that I had, but the earliest that I remember wanting to create riddles and clues and in the vein that we write our stories was when I was a little kid. We had a neighbor boy who was younger than me, and I created this fake map for him to find. And I took a slide and burned the edges of it and like crumpled it up to make it look old and authentic. And which I don't know what my parents were doing, letting me play with matches and cigarette lighters when I was little. I was telling my wife this the other day. I used to burn stuff all the time, and I guess I got through that phase. But I looked back and I'm like, oh, I would never let my daughter play with that many flammable things. Anyway, so back to this moment, that was the first moment I remember creating a fictional story for someone else. Was like the clues on this map, and like just, it wasn't more than a couple sentences of like, you know, where the treasure could be found and all this, but I hid it pile of wood, and I forced my neighbor friend to like search through these logs, and he finds this map, and then we like walk through and find this treasure. And at that moment, I think that was the first moment I realized that I wanted to write stories like that, because I liked the Goonies so much and Indiana Jones so much, and I was thinking, man, I would love to create stories like that and riddles like that. And I was always fascinated with lost treasures and lost artifacts and things like that. And I remember seeing a book at my grandparents' house about lost treasures of like outlaws of America, like Billy the Kid lost treasure and all this other stuff. And so I was always fascinated with that. And so that was the first time that I got to thinking, like, I would like to create these kinds of bigger stories for stuff like this. And so I think that was the first time.
Are you still fascinated with maps?
Yeah, and it's funny because I don't put a lot of maps, like actual maps, in my stories. In fact, I don't think there are any images of maps in my stories, but I do like finding them, or having my characters find things like maps of some, you know, it's not always just a scrolled up map. It might be, you know, a tablet that gives clues to locations or something. But yeah, I love doing stuff like that. I think it's so cool. And what you being from the South, you probably know a little bit about this sort of thing, but like the Civil War history and the stuff that a lot of the Confederates and the Northern soldiers took and hid while they were down here, they used different kinds of maps. They would use, you know, trees, and they would draw emblems on them like a ghost if it was close to a cemetery, or, you know, they would do these different little engravings on the bark of trees so they could find, you know, where they hid their loot. And so there's all sorts of ways to do maps. It doesn't always have to be on paper. So pretty interesting.
And there are guys down here that are seriously into decoding some of those, you know, 150-year-old mysteries that are, you know, still lingering about, for sure.
Oh yeah. Brad Meltzer was, he was on the trail of something down here in the South at one point. Him and his crew, they were looking for, they do that show Decoded, right? I think it's called Decoded on History Channel. And they never, I guess they never find anything, which is also kind of part of the fun. But yeah, they were, it was funny to watch them going about it and trying to figure all that stuff out. So
yeah. I had him on the show a couple weeks ago, and I asked him about that show, and you know, that there's, you know, always a conspiracy, and he said, yeah, but sometimes stuff is just exactly as weird as you think it is. You know, maybe we don't find a lot of stuff, but sometimes you walk away scratching your head and thinking, you know, stuff is really going on here, and I'm just going to go do something else so that I don't go crazy thinking about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel the same way. And that's really cool that you had him on the show. I didn't realize that. That's so awesome. I'm a big fan of his, actually. He's, and it cracks me up because I think he's a really good writer, but he gets beat up sometimes in reviews, and I'm thinking, he's really good. Like, he's very thorough. He's a very smart guy. He's a good writer, but he can't please everybody, I guess. Yeah. So that's cool that you had him on.
Yeah, his new book is phenomenal, and it's I think it's the best thing he's ever done. And the thing about Brad is the more success he has, the nicer he gets. He's just one of those guys that's just super accessible and just a real sweet guy. And
that is so cool.
Yeah, and I will forgive a lot in the writing, if you are, if your personality backs it up. Even though I think he's a great writer, but kind of my respect for him grows in knowing that he's just a great guy also.
Yeah. Well, here's to hoping you forgive me for lots of things. So.
Well, let's get into the books in just a minute. I love that Indiana Jones was a great influence for you. I remember watching Raiders of the Lost Ark in the theater when it first released. And I'm telling you, that movie changed my life. It changed the way I think about stories. It changed the way I look at the world around me, and always think that maybe there's something else beneath the surface. And I think that it has influenced me as a writer. That I take it that you had a similar experience then with Indiana Jones.
Yeah, sure. And it was, it opens up a can of worms that needs to be opened. The history books that we read in school and stuff don't have the full story. And, obviously everybody knows the quotes about how, the winners of wars write the history books and whatever. But, and we're not talking about war here. We're talking about something else. We're just talking about, mysteries and, ancient conspiracy theories and secrets and things. And, but there's not been, up until those movies came out, and I was little, so I'm saying this, and I might be ignorant to say it this way, but there really wasn't a whole lot of stuff like that yet. And at least in my realm, in my perspective, there wasn't. And it was huge. It was such a huge eye opener. And the fact that they just went for the greatest artifact of all time, right away. Are the Covenant. We should ease into this and start with something and crescendo to that. No. Let's go with the Ark right away, and then we'll go for those stones, and then we'll go for the Grail and whatever. But no, you're right, man. It was a huge influence, and it was so cool that it made history fun, and I know that. Some people and even in the movie they joke around X doesn't mark the spot, and it's not all about the whips and the gun and the action and all that. Archaeology can be very tedious and time consuming, and you have to have a lot of patience with it. And if you're on a dig site or the research aspect of it, but the fact remains is that on the other end of it is something that was touched by someone hundreds or thousands of years ago, and it hasn't been touched since or seen since. And whether that's a piece of pottery that someone dropped while they were evacuating their village, or if it was the Ark of the Covenant, those things, while they're not necessarily equal, they're still both very cool. And so the fact that they took that on with some really cool fiction stories, and had Han Solo playing the part, that was just amazing. So I said Han Solo. That's right. I'm also a big Star Wars fan.
Of course. I think I totally agree with you that before that movie there didn't seem to be anything like that. At least not in my world. I think Raiders came out 81. I was born in 71, so I was 10 years old. I was not looking for stuff like that until I saw it on the screen, and then everywhere I look, I was looking for that again. You didn't start out as a writer. You worked for a while as a guidance counselor at school, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right. I did that for 12 years. I was an English major at Southern Adventist University here in Chattanooga, and it's really interesting. I was at a conference a couple weeks ago in Austin, and about a week after, another writer reached out to me, and I found out that she was at the conference, and she went to the same college as me at the same time I was there, and she had the exact same experience, which was we both had the same professor, different classes, I think. We might have even been in the same class and just didn't know it. And this professor told us that our writing wasn't good, and it was, I was told mine was trite, and which now people ding me in reviews saying it's too predictable, and I'm like, well, life is unpredictable. You want fiction to be at least a little predictable. But no, she said my writing was trite. She told this other girl that fiction was, I don't know if she said it was of the devil or something like that, but I mean, come on, really? I mean, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were massive Christians. Like, those guys were like, how is there, and they wrote fiction, so.
Well, not only fiction, but they wrote fantasy with magic.
Oh,
and
yeah.
wizards and witches.
Like the real, like the biggest, yeah, exactly. Like the biggest blasphemy of all, right? And yet these guys were huge proponents of the Christian faith. And so, yeah, I mean, this woman clearly missed the mark. And that's, I tell people all the time, I'm like, don't judge the, whatever religion it might be. It might be Christianity or, Islam or something else, or don't judge the religion, and don't judge anybody really, but individuals don't make up the whole, and sometimes they're a bad example. And so, yeah, I went on that day. Actually, that professor told me that my work was trite. I walked out of the English building. I walked straight over to the administration building, and I found my advisor and said, I'm changing my major to psychology. And she was like, okay. So I went on, did a degree in psych, and then did a master's degree in counseling, did school counseling for 12 years, and coached soccer. And in 2015, I quit. So it was awesome to finally get out of that system, because it wasn't right for me. Like, it was, I was good with the kids. I loved the kids. I loved the teachers. The paperwork was the part I couldn't take, and the meetings, the pointless meetings, were just, the faculty meetings were so bad. And then in like 11 not 11, it was always right after lunch. I'd have to go to a central office meeting and talk about mission statements and things like that for like 3 hours. And I mean, at one point, one of my central office bosses said, now, you don't need to be on this committee if you're an action, or you want to take action on stuff. We're not going to take a lot of action. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, come up with ideas. So I didn't go back. Like, people are asking me, are you going to the meeting today? And I'm like, no. She said that if we liked taking action, that this wasn't a committee for us. Well, she apparently didn't think I was taking that literally. And I did take it literally. And so I started getting this, in the school system, it was a bad reputation. And in like the eyes of the people who knew, they were kind of like, yeah, I can see that. That doesn't make sense, does it? Like, no. So finally I got out in 2015. So when I'm 57, I'll start getting a small paycheck from the state of Georgia, because I work just across the border in Georgia. In fact, my house here is not 200 feet from the border. So, yeah, I'll be getting free money in like 15 years.
So what brought you back around to writing? I know so many people that, for every story that we hear of a teacher or something that encouraged someone and that sparked a flame, there's a counterpoint story where someone snuffed out the flame, or at least tried to. Mm-hmm. And a writer was discouraged and took another path in life. What brought you back around and made you want to write again? And when you did, what was the story that lit it up for you?
Yeah, so it was The Secret of the Stones, my first book, and I was on a picnic in like 2006, 2007, somewhere in there, with the girl I was dating at the time, and my cousin and his family, which is really cool. That's another branch, little tangent story. But one of my cousin's sons is now co-writing stuff with me, and so that's a cool little dovetail or whatever. But Yeah, that I was at Fort Mountain State Park in Chatsworth, Georgia. I'd been going there my whole life with my parents on Saturdays for picnics and stuff. It's about an hour away from Chattanooga, and I never really thought much about it, and I hadn't been there in like 10 years. And we go there for this picnic, and there's this ancient wall that's there that I had seen probably dozens of times growing up. But I never read the placard, and it just didn't really interest me. This long pile of rocks, and so I read this placard, and I'm like, wait a minute, nobody knows who built this. Nobody knows how old it is. They give a date range that's like BC and like 2,000 years ago, and then like maybe 700 years ago, but they don't really know. And so the wheels started turning, and at that point, I was working in the school system. I wasn't doing any writing. I was playing in a rock band and doing that part time. So any writing I was doing was just lyrics. But that moment, it was just like the light bulb went off, and I was like, oh wow, there's a huge story here. And so I started writing it, and I wrote it, and I got 17 rejection letters from some publishers, and decided to do it on my own. The first year I published it in 2010. It took a couple years to write it. It didn't do well. It was poorly edited. Like, you'll still see some of those reviews too on Amazon. Like, it'll say like good book needs an editor, stuff like that. The cover was bad. And I sold like 50 copies that whole year. And then the next year in 2011, one of the teachers I worked with, this older lady, she asked when I was writing the sequel, and I said, I'm not. I'm still in the hole a couple grand for that first one, and nobody was interested in it. So I had a bad experience with it. I'm just not going to write anymore. And she grabbed me by the shirt, and she said, you have to write that next book. I've read this one, the first one, 3 times. And it was that good. And I was just like, really? Okay. And this was an English teacher. And I also bumped into a couple of other professors from the past at a funeral, not that exact same time, but pretty close to that same time, who asked me, if I was still writing. And they were like, you were so good. It was like a high school teacher and 2 of my professors both approached me at on the same day at this funeral. And they, so that kind of lit the spark. And then when this lady that I worked with said that, I thought, you know what, if there's one of her, then there's probably 3 of her. And if there's 3 of her, then you can just scale that on up as high as you want to. And so that's what I thought. I thought I can find 3 people like her that will enjoy this story as much as she did. If I can do that, I can find more. And so I wrote the second book in like 6 months. The first one took like 3 years or whatever. And then, then I re-released the first one. I designed the covers myself, which is never a good idea. I figured out how to self-publish them without using a vanity press. Kindle was still pretty new in 2011, but there was some good information. And I re-released the first book and the sequel in December of 2011, and like 30 days later, it was still selling like 5 or 6 books a day. And I remember thinking, like, these are total strangers that are buying my books. Like, how is this happening? Like, this is incredible. And it was really cool. It was awesome. And so that's when I knew, okay, if people will buy these books with these terrible covers and the poor edits, I can invest in this and do it better and give them a better product, a better quality product. And so that's what I started doing. And I hired new editors. Once I released book 3 and book 4 was ready to go, I brought in Jason Whited from Las Vegas, who's an awesome editor, and he's made me so much better as a writer, and just an awesome guy. And then one of my fans, Ann Storer, had experience as an editor, and she's based in Australia, and she offered her services. And so they've been working with me for, 6 years now. And but yeah, so I'm sorry I branched off. That was not
no, that's fine.
Part of the question you asked. But yeah, that's what happened. That little old lady, not old but older than me, lady, and a couple of other teachers all encouraged me around the same time to keep going or to get into it, and so I did.
I love that so much. So your main protagonist is Shaun Wyatt in this series of books. Tell me about Shaun and what makes him a great character for you.
Well, he's me, and so I write myself into this story, and I'm great. That's it. There you go. No, so first of all, the last name Wyatt is a nod to Wyatt Earp, because I'm a big fan of Wyatt Earp and the history of Wyatt Earp and all that. And Tombstone's one of my favorite movies of all time. And so, yes, there's so many great quotes in that movie that just fit life. I mean, they just do. You're an oak, Wyatt. I mean, you're an oak. I mean, just so strong. But yeah, so that was sort of my nod to like one of the greatest like tough guys of all time. And then, but yeah, I write him. A lot of the way that he sees the world is the way that I see it. Like he has a terrible fear of heights, and people ask me how I write such an effective fear of heights into my character, and I tell them it's how I feel every time I'm in one of those situations. Like there's no way I'll ever get to go to Machu Picchu because I'm terrified of those 1,000-foot drop-offs. And I'm okay with flying, which Shaun is okay with flying an airplane. Helicopters are a little sketchy, but like being on on the Grand Canyon, or up in a tall building, it's just, if I get more than like 7 floors up, I start getting very nervous near balconies or windows. And so that sort of stuff, that's how I write him with that. The other stuff, like, he's brave, but he's easygoing, and I'm easygoing. It's easy for me to write the brave part and skill set with his fighting abilities and all that. I have to work on all of those things, because I'm not, I know how to box, but I'm not trained in like martial arts and stuff like that. And so, takes a lot more, inventiveness to do those, but I think I forgot what your question was. I don't know if I'm answering it or not. I feel like I'm trying to, but
yeah, I was just asking about Shaun and kind of where he came from, and what makes him up. So he's a reflection of you, which is a great way to start as a writer, because you know all about you and you can imprint or kind of reflect yourself on your characters. How does Shaun wind up in these situations? What's the catalyst to get these books going for you usually?
It's always something different. So, and it's funny because, it's so easy to get formulaic in what we do, and not even on purpose. Just, we fall into these ruts where the same old plot devices and the same things happen, and then the same, 3 acts take place within the story and the arc of the story and all that. For me, it is, I try to do something different every time. And I always try to get the reader, like, I want the reader's blood pumping after the first paragraph. Like, oh no, what's going on? So Shaun, I usually start off the Shaun Wyatt books with a prologue from history, somewhere in history, like that starts you off knowing what the topic is about. So for the new book that's coming out at the end of April, The Templar Curse, it's the first part of it takes place in France on October 13, when the Templars were all but eradicated by the king and by the Pope. And so these guys are trying to, a couple of them managed to escape with a very important artifact, and or relic, which I guess it's more of a relic. So they escape with this, right? And then, so that is what I like to read. I love reading stuff like that. And then you go from there to putting Shaun into a situation where maybe somebody's asking him for help, or maybe somebody has stolen something, or it's different every time. But it always boils down to trouble finds Shaun Wyatt. Like, he's not looking for trouble. And in this next book, really, he goes into a very, like, a darker place than he's ever been. And I warned my readers about it already. You know, the body count in this one's high because he's a former government agent, you know, trained killer. But I said, you know, the body count is high in this one because of who they're dealing with. And, you know, they're dealing with this ancient order of trained killers and a secret society of assassins, basically. And so, yeah, it's there's that. There's different ways to do it. I try to do it a new way every time, which is a little tricky. But, yeah, that's Trouble Finds Shaun Wyatt. That's the short answer.
You have tackled topics and mysteries from all over the world. Everything from from Lincoln to Excalibur to you've got samurai, you've got the ancient Middle East, you got Jerusalem, you've got it goes on and on and on. You've got Norse mysteries, you've got Atlantis type stuff. When you start thinking about a new book, and I'm thinking about this because someone asked me this about, I've got a book that there are like 4 different story elements and they have absolutely nothing to do with each other on the surface. But if you start digging a little bit, you find these really weird historical connections, and one thing leads to another, leads to another. And before you know it, there's, what seems ludicrous on the surface, makes for a really great mystery, because if you can start unraveling those things a little bit at a time to the readers, you blow their mind, you know, by the end of it. What's your research process like when you start putting together one of these books, and how do you, I won't say how do you look for those things, but how do you know when when one of these little details has landed in your lap and you're like, oh, this is going to work great here? Yeah.
So, there's two pieces to it. So the first piece is, there's a couple different ways that I do it. One way, I do try to keep it diverse, right? And like you mentioned, they're all over the world. One place I haven't tackled yet is India. And I really want to, my wife loves all things India and really wants to go there. And at some point we'll probably, travel over there. But my dad's been there on a mission trip before. And, but yeah, I'd love to do India. And right there off the bat, that guides me. Like, okay, I know that this needs to be in India. What can I learn about Indian history from the very beginning of its origins to right now? And so it starts with the learning process. So I pick either a place or an artifact or a culture, and then I start with that and try to learn as much as I can about everything surrounding either that place or that artifact or that relic or that culture or whatever. And then start paying attention to little interesting details that pop up here and there. So with The Secret of the Stones, it was so crazy. There were so many moments that gave me just chills, like the hairs on my neck stood up. When I was standing at Fort Mountain, I was, I mentioned that before, and I'm looking at this wall. So there's a story here, and I started thinking like nobody knows why this wall is here. There was a theory that a Welsh prince sailed across the ocean in like the 12th century and explored, and he landed in Mobile, Alabama, and worked his way up through the South. And there's another fortification here in Chattanooga that's very similar to the Fort Mountain Wall. And they think maybe those two have something to do with each other. It was the same group possibly. But I thought, that sounds thin, like this seems to be a theory somebody had. I thought, how absolutely crazy can I make this? I said, what if the ancient Egyptians built this? It's not like anything that they've built before, like in Egypt. It's not even close. But then I started researching it, and lo and behold, places that I've been visiting my whole life, or that were real close to me, or that I drove by all the time, were actually a lot closer than I thought to ancient Egyptian culture. So in Cartersville, Georgia, just north of Atlanta, it's between Chattanooga and Atlanta, there's a place called the Etowah Indian Mounds. And under these giant mounds, if you look at them from the outside, they're just giant mounds of dirt and grass. And they've been well maintained by the Park Services over the years and whatever, but underneath that dirt are pyramids. And it got me thinking, like, why did these Native Americans build pyramids? Why did they do it in South America? Why did they do it here? Like, where did they learn that? Because you don't necessarily have pyramids in every culture around the world. Like, there's only a few that are really prominent. You don't necessarily go to like Moscow and see a bunch of pyramids sitting around, and England and Spain. And so I thought it was really weird. So I had this crazy idea. One of my biggest areas of expertise is biblical knowledge, and which is really funny when people leave reviews suggesting that I'm off track with my biblical knowledge, because that's actually one of my strongest points. But I could have majored in theology. But anyway, the story idea was that, okay, in the Bible, one of Noah's sons saw Noah drunk. This was after the flood, and he was laughing at him. And the other two sons go in and they cover up their naked father. And it says that God cursed not him, but like his offspring, basically, and that his descendants would be cursed. And so the theory or the story goes that his descendants are the ones that moved west and founded Egypt. And there's actually a lot of evidence that points to that they were the ones that moved to the west of like Armenia and Turkey and all that, and they're the ones that founded the Egyptian empire. And they were moving west because they were trying to outrun the curse. That's the story, and that's the fictional part of the story. But they felt like it wasn't far enough, and so they built boats and they sailed farther west. And that's how the natives came to America. Well, forever we've been told that they came across on a land bridge, and in fact, I got a 1-star review on that book because this guy was bashing me about not knowing my history, and he even said, I think in the book I called it an ice bridge, and he said it wasn't an ice bridge, it was a land bridge. And I'm just like, okay, whatever. But yeah, he said, this guy Dempsey clearly doesn't know his history. He doesn't understand anything about it. And so I just went online and pulled up a link to an article that documents that Native American DNA is directly linked to DNA from the Middle East. And this is like new research that's just come out in the last couple of years. But I started finding stuff that was really creepy. So like the first thing I found when I was researching this story was, I wonder if there's a link between, the Cherokee tribes and the Creek Native American tribes here in ancient Egypt. And so I go on to the United Kingdom's, the UK's Museum of Egyptology, and the first thing that pops up on the screen is this little outline of the Nile River, and it traces down from the top of the screen to the bottom, and then it opens up at the delta where it feeds into the Red Sea, or feeds into the Persian Gulf, I guess. And so Persian Gulf. And so I'm like, wait a minute, what? This river looks really familiar. And so I pulled up the aerial view of the Fort Mountain Wall, and I overlaid it and Shaun does this in the story. Like, this happens in the story exactly like it happened to me. I overlaid this, and it's almost a perfect match of the Nile River. And I was just like, I was sitting in Chapel Hill, North Carolina when I discovered that. I was, the girl I was dating was at UNC, and I'm sitting there in her apartment working on this, and it was summertime, and I just was like, wow! I jumped out of my chair, and I was just like, no way! And there are these ancient pits along the wall there at Fort Mountain. These, like, nobody knows why they're there. They're random locations. Almost everywhere where one of those pits was located was a location of an ancient Egyptian temple along the river. And I was like, so this is a freaking map right here. We were talking about maps, like, that's a map. And so that's how the story began. And so whenever I create a story, I try to find something that gives me chills, because I know it will give the readers chills. And so, that's how I work. And it excites me, and it keeps me going. And the ending of the Templar Curse really gave me chills. When I figured it out, I was just like, oh, this is great. And it's going to suck if, like, it's my worst reviewed book and nobody likes it or whatever. But for me, it was just, I told a few people, I gave them the spoiler, like, not readers, but like other authors. And they were just like, whoa! I said, good. That's the reaction that I had. So the readers will probably have that reaction too. So did I answer your question? I feel like
yes. No. That's no.
And that's the price you pay for talking to me. I go off on like a million tangents. So.
Well, and I ask 18 questions at once, so that's I think it's perfect. But something you said, or the story you told about the guy that pinged you about not knowing history, that brings up a really great question, because when you're writing historical fiction, historical thrillers, archaeological thrillers, the very nature of archaeology is that the entire story you believe can change with one discovery, and a lot of times does, and a lot of times does. It takes, and sometimes it's a very small discovery that has a ripple effect that goes through everything that we think that we have known about something, and all of a sudden all of our preconceived notions are moot. So when you're writing historical fiction, as a writer, and this is just an academic thought exercise here, but as a writer, how concerned are you with historical facts, and when do you get to play the fiction part of that? Because we're writing historical fiction. Like where do you draw the line of this has to be perfect with what we know now, and then this part gets to be fiction? How do you separate the two?
That is a really good question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. So it is a little tricky line to toe. But I do get a lot of readers who defend me and say it's fiction, man, just relax. But I actually try to get as much current historical and scientific information as I can to include in the stories, because I want readers to think the same things I'm thinking, which is, wait a minute, maybe this isn't what we think it is. So I guess one of the things that I do, for example, The Secret of the Stones, in that first 3 books, it reads as a trilogy, the first 3 books. But to prove my point about Egyptians being able to sail across the ocean, like, nobody believed that was possible. They were river sailors, they would sail in the Nile, but they didn't go across the ocean. Nobody ever found any evidence of any seafaring vessels, except right about the time I was writing that book, a massive discovery was made in the desert, where they found this old harbor that had dried up, and it was full of these huge ocean-going or ocean-capable boats that the Egyptians had built, and it fit the time frame that worked into my book too. Like, it was just all just fell into place. But I love to include as much current factual information as possible. The place where the fiction steps in, a good example would be the Denali Deception. Everything I say in the Denali Deception is factual except the dialogue. There's no way we can know what those guys were saying to each other. You know, John Wilkes Booth, we didn't have a recorder in the pub there, or in the woman, can't remember her name right off the top of my head, the woman's house where they were staying in DC, Mary something. We didn't have a recorder, so we don't know what they said. So I fill in the gaps with what I think they might have said. So that part's fiction. The other thing that I come up with, sometimes the artifacts are real and sometimes they're not. Sometimes the thing that is discovered probably doesn't exist, but it fits into all the secrets that were being kept during the rest of the story. So in the Denali Deception, they find this huge thing. I'm not going to ruin it for readers, but they find this huge thing in Alaska, and it all sort of connects the dots, and there's a lot of very solid science behind what they find. It's probably not there, but it fits. Like, it all fits together pretty seamlessly. And some people could say, well, that's a stretch. Well, yeah, it is a little bit of a stretch. That's where the fiction comes in. But I try to write stuff, like, I don't write true stories, but I write true to life stories. So, like, things that could be and that are plausible are some of the, circumstances and events, the fight sequences or whatever, some of that stuff, like, oh, there's no way he could do that. Yeah, it's unlikely that certain situations could be survived or whatever, but it's not impossible. And if it's not impossible, then you can include it. And so I include what's not impossible with what we definitely know. And so that's where, I don't know if that answers the question, but the best answer I can give you.
Well, that's great. And being that, that facts may change as time goes on, using a little bit of artistic license in books will probably help them age in the future. Because if you're a real stickler for historical facts and those historical facts change, then your book gets dated.
Right. Yeah. And let me, and if I can interrupt you, I'll say that I think a lot of people really didn't like Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull because it didn't just cross the line, like, it didn't just dip its toe in the water. It jumped, like, into the deep end with the fiction part, and in people's minds, because alien stuff is in a lot of people's minds is like, the foil cap, and like, you've got to be crazy to believe in aliens and all that. You go from archaeology and plausible things like, that we know the Ark of the Covenant was an artifact and a relic that the Hebrew nation had. And we knew that it was a powerful weapon, right? Like, those things we know according to ancient texts. We know that the stones, I keep thinking the Karnak stones, but that's not right, is it? The stones in the Temple of Doom. Like, we know that there are these stories, these legends about these powerful stones, right? And we know that the crystal skulls have, we know that there is something strange about these things, that there was a curse around them, or maybe there's some sort of energy that science can't explain yet. That's all good, but that movie jumped from that into, like, this is a UFO under this temple. People revolted against that. And a lot of people liked the movie, but I knew a lot of diehard Indiana Jones fans that just gave up at that point. They were like, no, that was ridiculous. So you can be ridiculous, but it needs to be a pretty, it's got to be, you got to take the correct steps to it. Like, the transition's got to be good. And, sorry.
Yeah. ridiculous is okay if it's plausible. It doesn't need to be possible necessarily, but is it plausible? Can you connect the dots for the readers to not have them just completely drop out of the story?
Right, and that's what I think happened with the hardcore Indiana Jones fan. For me, I didn't mind it. Like it was all like, okay, that was cool. That was a twist that I didn't see coming. But it's not totally impossible to me either. Like I don't rule a lot of things out, but for a lot of people it was way too big of a jump. So I try to do my best to not make a massive jump like that, where people are just like, okay, wait a minute, like JFK was killed by aliens. All right, we're done. Goodbye, Dempsey. Right. Never buying another one of your books again.
Right. Ernest, this has been the fastest hour I think I've ever recorded.
Have we been on the phone an hour?
Yes,
wow.
We have been on an hour. And will you please come back another time and let's continue this conversation, because we still have so much to talk about. But tell folks where they can find.
Let's do next week. Let's do tomorrow. Whatever, man. It's all good.
Okay. Well, tell people. I know you've got
I'll block it off for you.
Absolutely. Well, but I know you've got a new book coming out. You've mentioned the Templar book coming out next month, but I think you've got an interim release that's just been out a couple weeks ago. Tell people where they can find you and what new do you have that we need to send people to go pick up.
Yeah. So the book that just came out a couple weeks ago is Shadows Rising, and it's from a spin-off series called the Shadow Cell Thriller series. That doesn't have a lot of history involved with it or archaeology or anything like that. It's just pretty much a straight up anti-terrorism thriller series that Shaun Wyatt's girlfriend gets involved with. And she is her main hobby is digging up lost or something from World War II that the Nazis took, and she tries to find it and recover it and bring it back to whoever it belonged to. And as a result of this, she's become very adept at, means a particular set of skills, right? And so she knows how, get into places other people can't get into. She can fight her way out of situations, and she's been trained since she was a very little girl because her dad was in espionage. And so, he raised the only way he knew how, which was to, so she could handle herself. And this is the side story where she's joined up with another woman who are part of this secret organization that fights terror almost with terror. And so that it's just the books are kind of small. They're only 130 pages or whatever, but it gives the reader something to read in between the Shaun Wyatt releases, and they're fun on their own. I mean, it gives me a chance to stay out of a rut and write new perspectives for characters and write new stories and things like that. So right now those are those are exclusive on Amazon. But if you email me or send me a message, I can get you a copy, and that's not a problem. Like, I'm not worried about that.
For people on other platforms?
Yeah. So what I do is I always release all my books on all platforms. Like, all new releases come out on all platforms. That particular series is exclusive on Kindle Unlimited right now and on Amazon. But I did release it. So if you join my VIP list, you'll get like a week to get the book on whatever platform you want. And then if you somehow missed it, just message me and I'll get you a copy of it. And then the first 7 books of the Shaun Wyatt series right now are exclusive with Amazon. Books 8 through 15 will not be. Like, they're not right now. And Templar is book 15, but I'm just experimenting with that to see how it goes with growing my readership and all that. And I know I have a lot of loyal readers that use Nooks and Kobos and things like that. So I try to make sure I take care of them as best I can. So.
Well, Ernest, it's been a lot of fun talking. I wish we could do it for 3 more hours, and we will.
We can.
Date, but
Hour
we
2
can.
Brought to you by Kevin Tomlinson.
Well, I heard he's bringing the coffee and bread, but I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I heard. Yeah. So, Ernest, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show, brother. I appreciate it, and let's do it again soon.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
They sat in silence, leaning on Spook Rock. It pulsed against his back, in rhythm with his heart. He fought an urge to press his palms to it and steal its mysteries. Kate took her hand away. This fundraiser for my father's campaign, was it your idea? No, I didn't think so. You need to watch out. For what? She stood and paced, hands in pockets, avoiding his eyes. Right now, you're a free agent. Nobody knows what you can do except me and Joey. That's rare. You've got space to find your own path, without everybody watching you or controlling you. How many of them, us, are there? A few handfuls of families. We used to be all over, but we're kind of dying out. The secrecy issue makes it hard for us to find each other, hard to find people to marry and the like. So we congregate in a few obvious places. Salem, Sleepy Hollow. Transylvania? Don't be stupid. There's no monsters, just people. And ghosts. Ghosts are people. They were. She held her arms out. That's all there is. People in the spirit world. And places in between. Magic places, haunted places. Like this. We gravitate to towns where we can stick together. It sounds nice. It can be smothering. We have factions. Not all of us want to get by in peace. Some of us, my father is one, say we need to be more aggressive. Increase our numbers. Take charge of things. Politics, finance. Fix the world. People listen. They think they're special. They don't call themselves the gifted. They call themselves the appointed. As if God singled them out to rule. My dad's a good man. He just thinks he knows what's best for everybody. And you'll be meeting his crowd. At the fundraiser. It will be mixed, mostly normals, but I'll point out the dangerous ones. My father employs a man named Mather. You can't miss him. He has purple eyes. Mather is like this rock. He'll be able to sense you. If you want to stay a free agent, you'll need to avoid him. Or else what? They'll want to recruit me? You're Ichabod's descendant. Ichabod was attacked and survived, a potential founder. They're already watching you. I'm no good to anyone. You don't believe that. Neither do I. She knelt and pushed the hair out of his eyes. What am I going to do with you, Jason Crane? Love me, he thought. He felt himself lean forward. They would kiss, here in this sacred place, beneath the stars. Stars? Stars? What time is it? Jason jumped to his feet. We need to go. Why? A firefly swept the air, flared yellow-green, and died. What's wrong? She followed his gaze and gasped. Fireflies swam in every dark crevasse. Faces coalesced where the lights hovered. Faces of crones and young boys and stern men. Emaciated, hale, wounded, vacant, menacing, piteous. Bodies took form. Military uniforms, bonnets, black lace, crepe, shrouds, winding sheets. Sleepy Hollow Cemetery had disgorged its dead, and that grand army of spirits now made camp at Spook Rock to await orders from their leader. A laugh chopped the wood of the forest. Jason had heard that laugh before. He squeezed Kate's hand. Run,